So when was the last time Angela Merkel was in the Security Council?
She was never there.
Will she ever be there?
I told you this is my dream to have her there, but no, I don't believe it until I see it and she sits there. So
you should call her.
Sorry.
You should call her sometimes and be like, yeah.
Yes, but this is not how she works. You know, this is.
Why don't we do anything about it? Because we know. I mean, the foreign ministry actually in the Bundestag admitted to it. Why don't we do anything about it?
You had our ambassador to Washington here, and you should have asked her the issue because it's not a UN issue. From the
but you've been the national security advisor. You must know about it.
Yes, but I'm no longer the national security advisor.
So you can talk more freely now.
Yes, yeah. with a microphone.
Yes. Thank you very much. Welcome, Christoph Heusgen, to Harvard, and thanks, guys, for having us. My program is called Jung Naiv, and we talk in an informal voice. So I'm going to call you Christoph. You can call me Tilo. Whenever you have questions, maybe at the end, you can call us by our first names. Christoph, how long have you been the ambassador to the UN now?
I've been ambassador now for almost exactly a year. And to live in New York is something special, and to live at these times with the UN is also something special.
And what have you done before?
Well, I'm pretty old. Where do you want to start?
Well, I know that you joined Angela Merkel when she became the Chancellor in 2005, and you became her national security advisor. Was that after she wanted to join George Bush in invading Iraq? That was afterwards, right? Or were you part of her strategy there?
Well, I don't know if you were born yet, but this was in the early. But her approval and her opposition to Chancellor Schröder at the time was during the invasion. That was 2003, and she became Chancellor in 2005, and I joined her as in the US one would say, as National Security Advisor in 2005. So during that decision or that position that Angela Merkel as head of the opposition chose, I was with Javier Solana in the European Union as his head of the so-called policy unit, and I was trying at that time with Javier Solana to see that the Europeans stick together. 2003 was not the easiest task.
So did you, like, before you said yes to the position, did you ask her, like, what was that all about? How could you want to join the coalition of invading Iraq? Did you ever, like, were like, what the fuck?
Well, you won't believe it, but this was 2005. This was no longer the issue. The invasion had taken place, and then now the consequences had to be dealt with. So, in life you take decisions, and then you don't question that, or in discussion don't question that for the rest of your life. I met the Chancellor. Actually, I didn't know her before. I was recommended to her, and then I had a long conversation with her where we kind of compared notes, or where I said what I thought that German foreign policy should look like, and then she employed me. So
do all your recommendations and all your advice in those 12 years, did she like follow that, or did at some point were there like conflict between you two as well?
Well, first of all, also when I got to know her in 2005, people said, well, this is a person, leader of the opposition, who doesn't have any international experience. And I learned very quickly that despite the fact that she was not in any foreign policy position as minister, she had a lot of experience on foreign policy. So it was nothing where I would say I could explain things to her, but it were things that no, we discussed jointly, and the task of a foreign policy advisor, of course, is always to, because a chancellor has to, a prime minister has to, of course, watch all the different fields in politics. So you have to follow foreign policy, and then have to see when decisions come up, what do you advise, and she has, prime minister has questions on foreign policy, and you have to be abreast of all the situations and then give your opinion to things. But the chancellor is somebody who listens and you can discuss with, and so positions are also developed in a dialogue. And there are many occasions where I remember where there were tough decisions to take and that were taken in dialogue, where always the foreign minister, whoever was foreign minister at the time, of course, also played a very important role.
What would you say was the most difficult decision that you had to make on a foreign policy basis in your time, in those 12 years?
Well, there were a number. There is one decision which now comes up again as I'm preparing for the UN Security Council, and that was last time we were in the Security Council, and that was a decision of Germany joining the coalition NATO to invade Libya. After Gaddafi was committing serious humanitarian crimes, and there was the danger of major attacks on civil society, civilians, and the decision when President Sarkozy was very much in favor, Cameron in favor, President Obama had changed his mind and was in favor, and then we were there, how do we vote in the Security Council? It was one of the most difficult decisions that were to take, and I still remember, still have it in front of my eyes in the office of the Chancellor when we discussed what to do.
I remember Westerwelle, like he didn't vote yes. So, like 7 years later, was that the right choice?
You know, it's. I would say, of course, not of course, but I would say it was the right decision. But until today, I have to say it's a very difficult decision, because we are part of an alliance. And when the major partner in the alliance say, okay, we think we need to go in there, it's very tough then to say in an alliance which you rely on, then to say, no, we are against it. Therefore, until today, this is, I think on substance we were right, because what the Chancellor said at this occasion is, says, yes, we can go in there. I mean, we all remember Iraq, we can go in there, but res pizza finem, what is going to happen afterwards? And today everybody says, yes, Germany was right, but I still, I don't have a feeling that, yes, we did the right thing. I still think it was very tough, because we voted against France, Britain, UK at that time. So it's not easy, and there is never black and white.
So it's quite interesting, like in 2002, 2003, Germany was part of the Security Council. That's when the Iraq invasion started, and we were the ones that said no. Then next time we were part of the Security Council, there was Libya. Do you foresee another invasion that we have to say no to?
Well,
please say no.
You never know what comes up, and this is, this makes the job interesting. What I told you that before I joined the Chancellor, I was working actually for 5-6 years with Javier Solana, building European foreign policy, and I go now into the Security Council with the firm conviction and determination that we have to try everything to keep the Europeans in the Security Council together, because this is then of course demonstrated in votes, in difficult votes. But I think in these days where multilateralism is under attack, and you said before, the Security Council is not functioning always very well, where I have to say in brackets, during the Cold War, it also didn't function, so it's nothing new. But at this time, I think it's very important that we Europeans stick together. So this will be one of the most important objectives for me. We'll be 5 countries, at least until April, then maybe only 4. But we have, with France, Poland, Belgium, and Germany, plus UK, 5 countries, and this is my goal, that we see in the Security Council that 5 votes are always on the same line. So strengthen the European voice, which also means that I hope a situation as we had on Libya, or as we had then 16 years ago or 17 years ago in Iraq, where Europe was divided, doesn't occur again.
So is being the ambassador to the UN, is that the most important ambassador position in the German government? Like, is it more important than the German ambassador to the US or to China or to Russia?
Not only because she was here, I must say, she's...
you can be honest.
No, she's a great friend and a wonderful diplomat, and I think the ambassador in Washington is at this stage more important. For me, I must say, having done 12 years National Security Advisor, longest ever in German history, I was ready for a job which is not as demanding, and I love the US, I love New York, and so the location was also very important in the choice for this job. But now in Security Council there will be some excitement, so it's not all that boring.
So whenever there's a Security Council session, you will usually be the one that is representing Germany and not like Heiko Maas? Or can Heiko Maas always be like, Christoph, I'm coming in, let me do that?
No. When we are in the Security Council, there is, this sign Germany, and the Germans decide who sits behind that. I have an interest to have the foreign minister there. My dream is to have the chancellor there, because when you have then a politician coming there, you demonstrate also that the topic is very important to you, that also you demonstrate the interest in the UN. So my objective is to have Heiko Maas and other ministers, but Heiko Maas in particular, as often as possible. And he became minister in April, and he was already 4 times in New York. He is very interested in the issue, and I'm very happy about this. Also, when he comes, then also other countries will say, okay, Germany is there with the ministers, so other ministers come, which also gives the sign that the UN, the Security Council, is important.
So when was the last time Angela Merkel was in the Security Council?
She was never there.
Will she ever be there?
I told you, this is my dream to have her there, but no, I don't believe it until I see it and she sits there. So
you should call her.
Sorry?
You should call her sometimes and be like, yeah.
Yes, but this is not how she works, this is...
How does she work?
She looks at and she says, is there a subject that is really very important? Can we actually not just have protocol, but can we actually achieve something? And then I have a chance that she comes, but she will not come just to be in New York and to be in Security Council, or she does not come because, well, there's my collaborator who worked for me, so I do him a favor. This is not the way she works.
So like 2 weeks ago, there was the United Nations, the week where like Trump talked at the General Convention. You were there along with Heiko Maas. You laughed at Trump when he attacked Germany.
I laughed with him.
It kind of looked like you laughed at him as well.
This is a lot also, I mean, you're from the media, this is a lot about perception.
How come that Angela Merkel doesn't take the stage every year?
Well, she has been in the General Assembly in the 13 years, 3 times. She was there, for instance, last time when the SDGs were adopted. We are a coalition government, and for the foreign minister, this high-level week is extremely important, and if the chancellor came, she would give the speech and not the foreign minister, and the foreign would be kind of in the shadow. And since there are so many operational things, the minister met, on the foreign ministers with regard to the Iran file, with regard to Syria file. So it's really the area where the foreign minister can do a lot of operational things. So this is why she always had either Mr. Steinmeier or Minister Westerwelle, now Mr. Maas there. But I hope that during the next 2 or 3 years she will come back to the General Assembly.
There's a saying in Berlin that she doesn't need the PR, Maas does, when talking to the General Assembly.
Well, I don't think it has to do with PR. The foreign minister traditionally is always very well known in Germany, has a very good rating, so I don't think that the foreign minister necessarily needs a PR. But of course, and I think he would also say this, for a foreign minister to speak for the first time in the General Assembly in this wonderful hall there, I think it's something moving and something that for him is also very, very important.
So let's talk about the Security Council. I mean, it still kind of works like after the end of World War II. We still have the 5 veto powers: China, France, Great Britain, the US, and Russia, of course. When are we ever going to abolish that system?
Good question.
Do we want to abolish it? Do we want to change it?
Yes, we want to abolish. Actually, Germany is part of the so-called G4. This is Germany, Brazil, Japan, and India, countries that also aspire to have a seat in the Security Council. And we believe that for the legitimacy of the organization, when you look at, you said it was composed after the Second World War, the world has changed. So it needs to be altered also, so that there is more legitimacy to the body. So we are working very hard and trying to make progress. The fact is that in the different groupings there are 150, 160 countries who think the same way. The problem is that they all have different views how it should be done, how many members, should they have the veto power or not, should they be all permanent or non-permanent or longer non-permanent. And one of the efforts, at least we want to undertake in next year, is to see if you cannot get a bit more these positions united. The P5, at least the P3 are US, Russia, China are not very eager, because of course when you are in a privileged situation you don't want to change, you want to change it. Particularly, I found this out since I'm here, that our Chinese friends are very much against the change. So I went to my Chinese colleagues and said, why are you demarching worldwide against the change? And they said, well, it has to be consensus, and and then I told him, but there is a mandate for 20 years to change it. Yes, he said, but still you are rushing things. So.
But is it like a realistic way of getting rid of the veto power, maybe, or changing the Security Council? What needs to happen?
There are different theories. There is a theory which says that something very dramatic has to happen when, this is often in history, when something very dramatic happens, then also these parameters, these changes take place. I think what we need to do is to actually get back to the General Assembly. Right now the discussions take place in kind of a working group and don't go to the General Assembly. I think at some stage one needs to go back to the General Assembly, and those in favor of a change rally around a resolution, around a substance. Africa is very important that because they are not represented, 54 countries that they join, and then at some stage I think we have to go to the General Assembly and have a vote. You have to, of course, the argument is when you enlarge it, it will be less efficient. So you have on the one hand the challenge, it has to be efficient, so you cannot give 25 countries a veto power. On the other hand, it has to be representative. So this is a bit the dilemma you are in. I think one should not have too many additional veto countries, but it has to be more representational. There is, for instance, the Africans, and this is also something one could think about. The Africans say they want to have for their members a veto power, but they say a member in the Security Council, permanent, who has the veto right, will only exercise the veto when the African Union as such is in favor, so that you have then the African Union actually voting. And this is, come back to what I said earlier, this is, by the way, in the German coalition agreement, that we go also into the direction of an EU seat, so that the countries in the Security Council commit to represent EU positions.
I was going to talk about the EU position or EU seat as well, but is it possible to imagine like a Security Council without a veto power, without vetoes, just democratic?
Yes, you can imagine everything.
That's not realistic. Look at the Russians, Chinese, and Americans.
I don't see that the veto power is given up.
So how about, I mean, the French have a veto power as well. Why don't the French and German make a pact and turn the French veto power into a European veto power?
You don't need to talk to me about this.
Does Merkel talk with Macron and like offer a deal? Okay, we do more on the Euro crisis. What you want, and you give us part of your seat in the UN.
That's a good proposal. We do a lot together. My German, my French colleague and I, we published a month ago or 5 weeks ago a joint article in the Financial Times where we said that Germany coming in the Security Council, that we will work closely together. We will have the presidency in the Security Council in March, France, in April, Germany, and we have agreed that we do a German-French 2-month presidency, so we also on the substance work together, and the themes that we will bring to the Security Council this month will be coordinated between us. We had a German colleague in the French mission learning. So we want to do German-French, but at the same time European, so that we also have this kind of European. In the coalition agreement between the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, it says that our goal is to change the seat into a European seat.
So why do the French say no?
They are very good diplomats. They don't say flatly no.
Peut-être.
First of all, France has not used the veto power for decades, and so they are also behaving, so to speak, when you talk about democracy and not using veto power. They are also very much in favor of informal but of European cooperation. But I think for them to be in the Security Council, to be in this privileged situation, is something that for them is still very close to their heart.
So we're going to talk about some other stuff as well, but what is what's the vision of Germany for the 2 years in the Security Council? What do you want to accomplish?
Well, we have to be realistic. Germany is one of 15, and we are not one of the permanent ones. So we cannot go in there and say from January 1st we're going to change the Security Council. So
that would be fun.
Yes, exactly. And we are ambitious, and I come to that. First, we have to do our homework. That is, 80% of the agenda of the Security Council is routine. You have all the peacekeeping operations, peacekeeping missions coming up regularly for prolongation or for change in the mandates, or you look at the political process that has to go in parallel with these peacekeeping operations. You have situations where you have crisis in the Security Council, and there we just want to be a partner on the same level as the others. This means that we have to know the substance, we have to know the procedures so that we can act on eye level with the others. For the other 20%, where you can change things and where you can influence things, you can do that a bit in general, but you can do that in particular when you have the presidency. As I said before, the presidency changes monthly. We will have the presidency in April of 19 and in June of 2020. Our program for the Security Council is, as I said, first of all, to be a substantive partner on the normal things, and then we want to bring first the issue of conflict prevention into this Security Council. So we would like to see to it that when crises come up, that early on the Security Council looks at these crises. China, Russia are very reluctant. They say the Security Council there, for when there are threats to peace and security, and in a crisis circle, they look rather late into a crisis. I always give the example of the situation in Myanmar. We all were aware of the fact that the Rohingya were treated badly, and that there were violations of human rights, and even in a massive way. But it only came to the Security Council when the situation got out of control. You had hundreds of thousands of people leaving the country. So it should go early on. The attention of the Security Council has to be earlier in a situation like we had in Myanmar. We have a good example last month when the Americans were having the presidency together with Peru. They were able to bring the situation in Nicaragua in the Security Council, where China and Russia were totally against it. For them, these situations, also situations where there are severe violations of human rights in a country, it says, well, this is the question of national sovereignty, and we should not intervene in national situations. So we want to do conflict prevention, see when the situation becomes critical in a country, and there are certain indicators for this. What I said was human rights is a very important one, number one. Number two, we want to bring certain issues that relate directly or indirectly to security into the Security Council. For our first presidency in April, we want to have the issue of women in the Security Council seen from two aspects. One aspect is sexual violence against women, which is actually, when you look at the Rohingya, when you look at South Sudan, when you look at Iraq, always even an instrument of conflict. And this, we want to bring this really on the agenda. And the other one is participation of women in politics, in decision-making, in arbitration. And in this context, of course, we were extremely happy about the decision of the Nobel Prize Committee to have two persons from the Yazidis and in Congo who were actually dealing with the issue of violence against women, to have them receive the Nobel Prize, and this encouraged us to go ahead with this topic. Another topic is climate and security. Also, when you look at certain situations where you have now droughts, like Chad is the best example where this leads to conflict. We want to have children and armed conflicts, then water or climate, and then human rights and human rights and security. Yes, these are some of the topics we want to highlight, and we have a number of partners in this, and we'll see how far we get.
I want to talk about some German-American relations, and want to get back to the Trump speech at the UN. You probably remember that he was talking about the ICC, the International Criminal Court. Do you remember what he said about it? Otherwise, I can quote him. He said,
you don't need to quote it.
The United States does not recognize nor support the International Criminal Court. He said, we reject the ideology of globalism. We embrace the doctrine of patriotism. Germany recognizes the ICC, correct? You support it, right?
We have been one of the driving forces behind the ICC. We have always been supportive for this, and I must say also somebody who's a bit older, but who thinks also in German history. One of the first examples of international international court who looked at violence, genocide committed by governments was the Nuremberg trials, and the Nuremberg trials were actually brought forward and promoted by our American friends to be against the ICC, which tries to prevent impunity for massive human rights violations. To see Americans not being part of that hurts.
So what can we do about it? Because it's not only, it's not a Trump position. Obama had the same position. Bush actually in 2002 enacted the Hague Invasion Act, or the official name is American Service Members Protection Act, and it's protecting US personnel, elected officials like the president and all that, to be called to the ICC and be like trialed for war crimes. I mean, George W. Bush would be a great example. He could be brought to the ICC. So isn't Trump saying what the U.S. position has been for decades?
Well, the U.S. position, first, of course, with regard to what you said about Bush, what now Trump says with regard to American servicemen being subject to ICC. One of the most important, or one of the bases for the ICC is that the ICC only prosecutes people when the national system doesn't provide for criminal courts or for prosecutions. And I must say, I don't have any doubts that, and the American president shouldn't have any doubts in the American system, that here, when crimes are committed by soldiers, that they will be prosecuted here. And there are a lot of good examples where this actually happened. So this concern, I think, is not really.
Who was prosecuted for invading Iraq? Who was prosecuted for the torture, the global torture program?
There have been Americans convicted in the U.S. for torture, and
really?
Yes.
Who?
Yes, well, I don't have the names here, but there have been a number of American servicemen who, because of violations of human rights, were convicted. So, and by the way, also when it comes to the ICC, also within the U.S. administration, the position was not always categorically against that, but they also took interest, and also to a certain degree there was support. Actually, the Rome Statute was signed by the US. It was not ratified, but this also shows that at least parts of the US administration in the US is not that there is just one position where that is shared by everybody, but there are some discussions.
But like the Hague Invasion Act I was talking about in 2002, it was supported by Democrats as well. Like Clinton voted for it, Biden voted for it. So how can the international community make America be part of the ICC? Can we not make them? Are they above the law? Because that's what Trump is saying. There are laws for thee and laws for us.
First, the ICC is is a criminal court, and it's not for other political decisions. There you have the ICJ, and there also during the last week, actually, and this I also found very alarming, that also with regard to the International Court of Justice, there the Americans are questioning the rulings. So this is something which I find indeed alarming.
I also want to talk about the respect for international law. Germany is a big proponent of adhering to international law. Do you think America has become a proponent of adhering to international law under Trump?
Well, at least there have been clear cases where the U.S. has been violating international law, and this is something that, of course, we are very concerned about, that our American friends are, as you quoted the speech of Trump, patriotism versus globalization, and part of globalization, of course, is multilateralism, multilateral rules, and for American friends to leave the climate, the Paris Agreement, not to be part. Also this year, one of the most important decisions taken in the UN was the Migration Compact, where only the US and Hungary have not been part, for the Americans to leave UNESCO, to leave UNRWA, and then also during my period here, the decision to go to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was a clear violation of a binding resolution of the Security Council, and this, of course, is something we are very concerned about.
Another example is the Iran deal, leaving the Iran deal.
Yeah, I should have mentioned this first, but you already discussed it, I understand.
But what can be done about it? I mean, they cannot be above the law, so what can Germany, what can the Europeans do?
Well, what can you do? First, this is actually the thought I had when I came in here and saw this old university, Harvard, looking back at a long history. I mean, we are right now in a certain moment, one cannot and must not, and hopefully we don't have to assume that the present policy, this neglect for multilateralism, will continue from now onwards. I think we should all hope for this country to again recognize the value of multilateralism. And I believe that the policy which has been described actually in an article over a year ago by Cohen and McMaster, both have left the White House, where they said, well, the world is an arena, there are winners and losers, that they again to a certain degree understand what we believe is that in a worldwide situation this must not be a case. You can have, and this is, I'm an economist, David Ricardo taught us that 200 years ago, that in trade, in free trade, you have situations where all sides win, and we hope that to a certain degree our American friends will understand that their transactional policy and siding on one issue with that country and on another issue with another country, that in the long run this will be detrimental to the interest of this country, and that to pursue American interests is better to join forces with countries that share interests, that share the basic values, and then you are in a better situation. And I hope that this view at some stage will also prevail again even in this administration.
So I wonder, why do we only just talk about that America doesn't adhere to international law? Like when Russia invades Crimea and takes over Crimea, annexes it, we make sanctions. Why do we have sanctions for the US for invading Iraq, for the torture, for the examples you just cited?
Well, of course,
just because they're friends, we don't.
No, they are. As I said, the International Criminal Court cannot be called for because of the invasion of Iraq. This is not the task of the International Criminal Court. I think what we have to do, we have to stand up to the decisions that we think are wrong, and they're like on the Iran issue, that we have to see how what we stand for, the JCPOA, an agreement that stands and that has been also actually endorsed by the UN Security Council, that it still works despite American opposition, and that we are able to keep the others together and see that it prevails. On the climate issue, we have to see, and many American states are absolutely still following the Paris Agreement, and that in the end we will prevail, and that we will get the Americans then understand that opposing these will not yield the result that they want.
So we have 10 minutes left. I want to talk about the German-American issue that concerns international law. That's the drone war. I mean, the drone war. Everybody knows the Ramstein is the relay station for the American drone strikes around the world. I mean, the signals from New Mexico they are being processed to Ramstein so the satellites can feed the drones who attack in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in Somalia, and everywhere in the world where the US thinks it's right. Why does the German government, I mean, you've been part of the German government, why don't we do anything about it? Because we know, I mean, the foreign ministry actually in the Bundestag admitted to it. Why don't we do anything about it?
Well, you had our ambassador to Washington here, and you should have asked her the issue because it's not a UN issue. From the
but you've been the national security advisor. You must know about it.
Yes, but I'm no longer the national security advisor.
So you can talk more freely now.
Yes, yeah. with a microphone.
Yes.
Yes. No, we assume that the US adheres to international law. We assume that the Americans, when they operate from Ramstein, also adhere to the agreements that have been achieved when their stationing there was concluded and agreed upon. And so on the other hand, and now I come a bit more to the UN, we have, of course, to see in the UN also how do you deal with means of warfare that are not really in the legislation of the UN. Drones is one thing, I think even more relevant because it has even more consequences is everything on cyber war and what you see worldwide on this. And I think there the UN, they're discussing it, but of course it's extremely difficult then with 193 states to come to a definition, to come to a regulation of these issues. Therefore, I was so happy that at least on migration, also a very divisive issue, that the UN was able to come to a compact on migration. But these issues, drones, cyber issues, are issues that I think need to be regulated.
But how can we make the Americans stop using Ramstein for the drone war?
As I said, this is the situation in the fact that the Americans are in Ramstein are the result of a bilateral agreement, and
I'm sure the bilateral agreement doesn't state you can drone anywhere in the world.
The bilateral agreement says that you adhere to the agreement, and you adhere to when you work from there, you adhere to international law.
So is there any hope that we can change something about it? Because the coalition treaty, it also says we're against drone strikes, illegal drone strikes. So everything is there.
Well, I don't think that this coalition agreement says it that clearly. Also in Germany, there is a discussion about the use of drones, and do you have also at NATO this is discussion about the use of drones, and we are not there yet. There are clear regulations, and I think this is a subject one needs to continue to discuss both domestically but also within the alliance and also internationally.
Okay, these were my topics. Do you want to do a quick Q&A from the audience?
Yes, but we stand between the program and the cocktails there. So
I was just told we can do a Q&A. You want to like 5 minutes? Are there any questions for Christoph Heusgen? All right, ladies first.
For the cocktails. So.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Inga Müller. I'm a current Carlo Schmid Fellow and board member of the UNA Germany. My question would be, imagining that your team is already intensively preparing for your seat, what pen holderships will you take on, or will be interesting to take on?
Yes. Interesting question. Before I came here, I was not a UN expert. I didn't know that much about these pen holderships, and now I tried to learn about this. On pen holderships, there is no written rule about this. Penholderships means, for those who are not that familiar with this, that when you have a resolution on Iraq, Iran, on Congo, on South Sudan, there is somebody who puts a first draft on the table. And there was a situation, I learned this now in 2003 during the Iraq War, where between the French and the British, they were fighting who puts the draft on the table. And at some stage, I think the French did it at 2 o'clock in the morning and the British were at 3 o'clock. And at some stage said, well, this cannot go on like this. Let's agree on having penholderships decided upon before. And now, with regard to the penholderships, our friends from the P5 say, well, we have all the experience and therefore we should have the penholder. We give the so-called subsidiary bodies. There are some with the Security Council. As such, there are kind of working groups that look at sanctions against North Korea or Libya or Taliban or this, and there the elected are given the task of having the sanctions committees here and the penholders with the P5. So we, the elected 10, don't think this is really fair. So we are, on the one hand, trying to also have the P5 take some of these subsidiary bodies. And then also we, the elected ones, also want to take some of the penholderships which are the interesting ones. It's not decided yet, and also I believe some questions will be open, and maybe there will also be some games played there. Right now, sorry for being so long, but right now we are aiming at Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is where we have, Germany has the second largest troop contribution, and we spend hundreds of millions, or some million every year on Afghanistan, so we have a keen interest on keeping the country fairly stable, so we want that. And then from the Swedes, we want to take over the penholdership for Syria and the humanitarian issues there. But maybe also other issues. We are subsidiary bodies, women, peace and security, and when it comes then to resolution there, we also want to hold the pen. So these are some of the things. But as there are no rules, also when things come up, I can imagine that we also on other issues would put a first draft on the table.
We have another question there.
Just a quick remark combined with thanks, Tilo, for your question on the Iraq torture, etc. And I would really like to emphasize that we should probably look more into it. It would be great if we could have a frank answer to that, but I do understand the shackles on him. There have been roughly 20 soldiers that have been removed from service and a few sentenced to a few years, but I'm certainly not legitimized to use the term sacrificial lamb here. I think this is only the tip of the iceberg, and it would be great to have a frank response, but yeah.
I mean, the new CIA boss, Gina Haspel, she was part of the torture program.
Yes, but you confirm what I said, that in the United States they have a legal system which also, when you commit violations of international law as a soldier, you have to stand trial. So this is in place. But with regard to Abu Ghraib, with regard to Guantanamo and others, I don't question that there were very, very very important and violations of human rights committed, and this is part of what I said, and we're very concerned that our American friends don't adhere in some cases to what we stand for as Germany, that is the respect for international law and multilateralism.
Do we have one final question over there, maybe? I mean, the part of the CIA torture program were the rendition flights, and Germany was part of that as well, via Frankfurt. So we still have to talk about that at some point in the future.
Hi, good evening. My name is Anna. I just completed a 3-year stint with the United Nations in Syria and am now about to deploy to Libya. So you mentioning panholdership on the humanitarian portfolio, I'd be curious to hear more about that, and in particular with regards to a united European front in the P5. That's great to hear, though our greatest concern has always been the Russian veto, not only the infamous 2013 one, but also with regards to renewal of the cross-border resolutions, for example. So I'd be curious on your thoughts. Thanks.
Yes. First of all, as I said, we try also in Syria to have a common European voice with regard to the resolution on Syria humanitarian. This will not be easy because our Russian partners will say, well, there is no more need for this because now the legitimate government is back in control. There needs to be for these kind of aid. There have been negatives there. We have to see what is feasible. We will do everything to continue and have this resolution and continue the humanitarian cross-border humanitarian aid, because we believe it's absolutely still necessary to provide the population in Iraq with humanitarian aid.
Christoph, thank you so much. One final question, since you love New York so much, do you ever get out of New York? Do you ever, like as the ambassador to the UN, do you travel to Libya to see with your own eyes what's going on? Do you ever travel to Yemen, to Afghanistan, to Gaza?
Well, in my previous 12 years, I've traveled so much that one of the reasons why I went here was I want to travel less and be a bit more with family, because this was really cruel when you have that job as national security advisor. But of course I want to travel to. I've been in some of these countries you mentioned already, but right now if I were with the Security Council, I would have had to cancel my visit today because the colleagues in the Security Council are in Congo right now, and I think it's very good for the Security Council also to go to these places. And one of the, now this is a bit internal cuisine, but my colleagues who work in the security in our team in New York, in our embassy, I have a very dedicated, very good team, but also as that everybody is responsible for a certain peacekeeping operation or certain region, also in the preparation for the actually goes to the countries, because it always makes a difference when you see how the conditions are on the spot. It's much better than when you deal with a resolution that you know what you talk about. You can get so many reports, and we have very good embassies, but to see it with your own eyes is. I've been in Mali, and since I saw things in Mali, when we discuss these things, it's much better. So, been in Afghanistan, I've been Israel, Palestinian terror. So in many of these, and this gives you some. I think it's important to know what you talk about.
Thank you very much. Thank you.